Dragon Dreams. I'm Ivan, and my channel is about indie, old school, and unconventional role-playing games. To start today's video, I would like to thank my viewers. I'm now up to over 100 subscribers, and I really like to thank you for your support. And without further ado, let's get on with today's video. Alright, so today I'm going to talk about why I think that BECMI D&D is the best version of D&D. At least that's what I think. Alright, so what is BECMI? So BECMI is a version of D&D from the 80s. It replaced BX, the Mulvey Cook Basic Expert Edition, which is slightly earlier than that. Although really I think there was a sense back then, I don't think any of us really knew what the difference was. I certainly didn't. They're really kind of like different editions of the same game. It features a very simple short list of classes: fighter, magic user, thieves, clerics. Very simple rules. Not nearly as many spells as other versions of D&D, which makes it a lot easier to manage as a DM. It also features race classes, which are races as classes. So like elves, dwarves, halflings are actually classes. I'm going to cover that in just a bit. For right now, we'll want to focus on humans, and then I'll get to non-humans. The official setting for it was Mystara, which was supported by these gazetteers for each country, these things called the creature crucibles, which detailed dozens of new races if you wanted to play creatures like dryads and trents. It also had the Hollow World box set, which is a hidden world inside of the Mystara planet, which is really cool. My view on BECMI is that BECMI is simulationist, and I am too. In an earlier video in the description, I talk about gamism, simulationism, narrativism, and problem solving is what I think are these days the four major approaches to TTRPGs. I am mostly a simulationist, and I think that's why I like BECMI. It's down to earth, low fantasy. It has a very zero to hero quality about it. And this was because that's what was popular in the 80s. So in the 80s, there were a lot of kind of Lord of the Rings copies, basically. Novels that there are series that were very, very influenced by Lord of the Rings. Also, of course, Star Wars was big. If you remember the movie Willow by Lucasfilm, that came out then. And so these all have kind of this same sort of story arc, which is there's an evil overlord or tyrant trying to conquer the world or has conquered the world in the case of Star Wars. And there's a kid from the sticks or kids from the sticks that stop it, whether it's Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, or whether it's Luke Skywalker, or whether it's Willow. Okay. And classes in BECMI, in my opinion, are meant to be broad categories of occupations, not specific occupations. So when they're talking about a fighter, the fighter could be, a knight who serves in an elite group of warriors. It could be a gladiator or he or she. BECMI omits classes that were in AD&D, or classes that were basically meant to be members of elite orders. So this includes paladins, rangers, and druids. It does, however, allow lawful fighters to become paladins at 9th level and neutral clerics to become druids at 9th level. So there's a shift, and I'm going to get to more of that later. But there's more of a sense that if you're starting out as a zero and going to hero, then it makes sense that the classes are the sorts of things you could be at first level. And when I got going with BX and BECMI first when I was learning D&D back in the 80s, and then I was a kid, and then around age 14 I started high school and we switched to AD&D 2nd edition, which came out right about that time. One of the things that I was kind of baffled by with AD&D, I'll be honest, is that in AD&D, there are these specialist classes, as I said, you can get to at first level. And that didn't really make sense to me because it felt a little bit like saying you can go into special ops immediately after you finish boot camp. In fantasy stories, typically you're not going to have like an elite knight of some elite order or a ranger like Aragorn who's defending the wilds, defending civilization against the monsters of the wild, or a druid of some hidden druid grove deep in the forest, when you're just starting out, when you're just like some kid from the sticks, you're going to be recruited into those orders after you've done something to earn your wings. And a little bit more on my thoughts about that in just a second, but I want to unpack a few more things. Also, in the Rules Encyclopedia version of BECMI, which was a compilation that came out in 1991, they added a skill system, which was very similar to the non-weapon proficiency system of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So what this means is that if you want to make a ranger, you could just take a fighter and have nature skills. Now, you could also do that with a magic user, though. You could also have, I don't know, like a cleric with minstrel skills, for example. So the skill system opens things up so that when you make first level characters, they're not just classes. They're also a set of skills which are above and beyond the classes that you have. And this allows you for a lot of customization. They also have a weapons mastery system that you can get to at higher levels. So to me, this system makes sense for simulationism because it's very down to earth. It's reflective of what would make sense in a fantasy world like Mystara. What it's really different, where it's really different from 5e, for example, is that to me, 5e kind of feels like, I mean, D&D existed before computer RPGs, and then we had computer RPGs, and then you have 5e, and it almost feels like Wizards of the Coast basically took what computer RPGs are like and basically made character creation more like creating a character with just a bunch of powers. So you're just this kind of badass superhero who can wander through adventures, beating up orcs and goblins and trolls, with a whole ton of special moves. Almost all of the classes have spells. It didn't feel realistic to me. And when I say realistic, I mean realistic within the assumptions of a fantasy setting. BECMI defined characters much more in terms of the setting and in terms of being rooted in the background of the setting, so that when you come to the foreground of the adventure, you have a full-fledged character who's well-rounded, who can then use whatever abilities she or he has to accomplish the goals of the adventure. Okay? And this segues in to my next point, which is that I believe that BECMI focuses on character advancement more than character generation. And that may seem very weird for a lot of people who are used to D&D versions that focus on character generation. I know people who have complained that some of these older versions like BECMI and BX don't have enough in them for the character generation that they would want. But this is because, again, if we go back to this concept of zero to hero, and this concept that you're not going to start out as a person with a bunch of powers. You're going to start out with just, a guy who, or gal who knows whatever it is and you use that to deal with the problems you're facing. It kind of starts to make more sense, so that you start to realize that as you gain levels, you gain weapons mastery, for example. As I've said, there's also specialist classes that some characters of some classes and alignments can switch to at higher levels. And I've put a link below to an expansion that I've made for this on DriveThruRPG, in which I have additional specialist classes so that every one of the 4 main classes of every different alignment has access to higher level specialist classes that they can go to. And that's what I mean by advancement over character generation, is that you make to make choices as your character advances. Later on, you can also build strongholds and attract followers. Even after that, you can actually acquire your own what's called dominions to rule, which are like fiefdoms that have been granted to you by the king or something like that. So you actually have your own country, like your own county or duchy or something like that, that you have actually been given to rule. So you could actually go into a military part of the campaign where, it's not so much about dungeon crawls anymore. It might be more about, you have your PC, but your PC is the leader of a war that's taking place. So you're leading armies and navies. And I think that makes it so much more than just about adventures. It's really about the life cycle of a hero in a fantasy setting, going from zero to hero and beyond. Now, another point is that BECMI emphasizes PC participation in the setting. So this is where I think it really shines, is that it really is connected with the setting, and a simulationist game needs to be, because the setting is the background. The campaign, the series of adventures you're doing, is the foreground. So I think that if you're going to simulate things, the background's important. You need to know who your character is, culturally, religiously, in terms of occupation, which is more than just your class. It's what your character does, and the well-roundedness of your character. So you'll notice that in the Gazetteers, for example, you'll get different classes. In the Emirates of Alarum Gazetteer, you get the Dervish class. In the Republic of Darrocan Gazetteer, you get the Merchant Medic class, which can be stacked on top of any existing class. In the Thracian Empire, there are Rakes, which is a thief variant, which is more like a swashbuckler. So they're not criminals. They're very similar in powers to thieves, but they're almost totally different from thieves in terms of how they'd be played and how they would operate within the setting. So you get this connectivity with the setting in BECMI in, I feel like, a much more robust way that makes more sense to me. As I've said, and this segues into why I think races as classes make sense for BECMI. Because I think the concept is that non-human characters are really alien. So that Frank Mentzer, who was the author of BECMI, creator of BECMI, is on record for saying that they really should have said species instead of races, because there's really kind of a sense to which elves, dwarves, and halflings, or as I've said, in the creature crucibles, you can be trents or dryads, or these creatures are very non-human. They're very alien. So, so elves are fighters, magic users. Dwarves are a fighter variant with underground skills. Halflings are kind of like really short fighters who can't use such big weapons, but they make up for it by hiding skills, and they also have the best saving throws in the game. And as I've said, the creature crucibles detail dozens of different races you can play. In addition, the Elves of Alfheim Gazetteer explains that elves would never steal, because it completely goes against their entire being and their kind of entire perspective. They don't have the same perspective on economics, for instance, that humans do. So stealing wouldn't make sense to them. Also, all elves are magical. So this is why you can't be, say, an elf fighter or an elf thief. You can be an elf fighter magic user. That's a standard elf class. Also, at 9th level, they have the option for an elf to switch to an elf wizard, in which they get a completely new spell list, where they actually get kind of like druid spells, which really kind of appeals to me because it's more nature-oriented. If I were running a BECMI campaign, I might allow elves to be magic users, because it sort of makes sense that they're a magic race, that not all of them necessarily study combat. So in the Dwarves of Rockholm Gazetteer, we actually find out that dwarves can be clerics. So there's a dwarf cleric class. And so it goes into their religion. And so it explains, not all dwarves are just warriors. Some of them are clerics. But it also explains, again, they don't steal. It goes against who they are. And they also don't use magic in the conventional sense. In the Halfling supplement, the Five Shires, it explains that halflings can't do ordinary types of magic. They also, again, would never steal. It goes against who they are. They have a very different relationship with religion, so they don't have clerics. And that's why most halflings are basically kind of like diminutive fighters. Now, they do have a master class, which is a specialist class that halflings can get to at high levels, where they do actually get spells. They're really cute. They're like more halfling style. Like they're things you could imagine people in the Shire having. I think it's kind of cool. It's like they have a different magic that's not very well known to outsiders, which I would think is kind of neat. If I were running things, given that they have a rake class in Theatus, I might let them be kind of like a rake, because I could kind of imagine. I mean, Bilbo is a burglar, so I could kind of imagine a halfling being stealthy. So I might allow them to be kind of like a thief variant, not a criminal, but kind of have similar skills to a thief. So so there's really this sense that again, it's very setting specific. It's anchored. The concept of how races work in BECMI is anchored in how the fantasy world works. So the reason why they have race classes, instead of this idea that there's different occupations that different races can have, where they can be different classes. Or to put it another way, the reason why races have a different set of classes they can play, sometimes only one, sometimes two in the case of dwarves. I think some people like, I don't know about centaurs, if centaurs can be like clerics or magic users. Sometimes they can play multiple classes, but the point is they're just very different from humans. And that was a decision I think that was made in BECMI that differentiates Mystara, the Mystara setting, and settings they're expecting you to use if you make your own setting, from settings like World of Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms, which were made for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons originally. One thing I really love about BECMI is the rules are really simple without being simplistic. They're very simple at their core. And I love that it's so much easier to DM, and it's also so much more accessible as a player. I find that 5e was honestly daunting to me as a veteran player. I've been playing D&D since 1983. Well, okay, I had a 20-year hiatus between, 2000 and 2020. Okay, and I got 5e, and I was like, whoa, what the hell is this? But the thing is, I find it's too much. It's like you're not allowed to not have a subclass. If you play a fighter in 5e, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't just be a fighter. You have to be a subclass of a fighter. And looking at all of these things, it's just too much. It's too much in the wrong way. Like people have said, well, AD&D is complicated. AD&D is complicated, but only when you want it to be. There's a lot of complex rules in AD&D, but even AD&D is simple at its core, and BECMI is even simpler at its core. And so I sort of feel like, as a player, I'd rather play a game like BECMI, where the rules are simple, but with a good enough DM and a good enough setting, I can customize my character in a way that makes sense for the setting and for they have all this kind of advanced stuff when you want them, but you don't really need them if you don't want them. And finally, this dovetails with immersion, and immersion is very important in simulation, because the thing is that, to me, too many rules means too little immersion. The more rules you have, the more you're in this gamist mentality, that's why I say it feels like 5e feels like a video game to me, whereas BECMI feels like a simulation to me. I feel more like my character is really there when I'm playing BECMI than when I'm playing 5e. And of course, as a DM, I want something that's simple. They have a lot fewer spells, as I alluded to earlier, and that makes it so much easier as a DM to keep track of the spells. Apparently, there's an attrition of DMs in 5e. There aren't enough DMs to go around. And people have said this is because 5e is just too darn complicated. And it's complicated in the wrong way. There's too much to know. I don't run 5e because I don't feel qualified to run 5e, not because I don't know it well enough. As I said, I'm a veteran gamer. So those are all reasons to have simplicity, and it's elegant simplicity. It is simplicity that is conducive to simulationism. One other reason why I like BECMI so much is the Rules Encyclopedia. When the Rules Encyclopedia came out, it was the first book that I saw that was one book that had absolutely everything in it. It has the player information, it has the DM information, it has all the monster listings from all the box sets, and it even had a short section introducing you to Mystara, complete with maps. So it's not enough to get information like the differences between, say, like Traldaran and Thaetian culture and how those can clash at times, or to know what the difference is between different religions. That's not in there because you need to get the gazetteers for that. And the book would honestly just be too darn thick if they put all the gazetteers in it. But the little short section on the Mystara setting is just enough to start out. So you definitely have the maps and so forth to place your adventures. You have enough information to give people, you know, here's where you are, here's how long it would take to travel there, this is what the different types of terrain are like, and so forth. And finally, the final reason I really love BECMI is because BECMI rewards long-term commitment like no other version of D&D I've ever seen. First of all, you can go to 36th level. Yeah, you heard that right. 36, not 20th, 36th. That's friggin' awesome. From there, you can actually become an immortal. And to me, that's so rewarding because you could play a BECMI campaign for years, going from 0 to mid-level adventurer to branching off, being taken in by secret elite orders like paladins or like the Order of the Griffin in the Grand Duchy of Keramikis, to being a lord or lady or a wizard or head of a thieves guild or a church patriarch or matriarch who actually has followers, kind of like minions basically, to actually being granted your own dominions to rule, which are like these complete lands, as I said, to maybe actually becoming a king or queen, to actually becoming like a world champion, to actually becoming an immortal, and actually being able to affect the entire cosmos. And what that means is that BECMI is a simulation in which you can go from being a character who has almost no ability or potential to affect their world to being a character who is so powerful that they can they can affect the entire cosmos. If I play my cards right and I get good dice rolls, I can go into a BECMI campaign and really become somebody who can radically affect the setting. So anyway, that's what I have to say about BECMI. What do you think about BECMI? Have you tried it? Do you like it? What's your favorite version of D&D? If you have different opinions than I do, feel free to tell me. Epilogue here. I am planning to run a BECMI campaign in a few weeks. So if anybody is interested, please let me know in the comments and give me your email address and I will email you, or if you prefer Facebook handle or something like that, some other way of contacting you is fine, but I'm looking for players. All right, take it easy. I hope you found this video informative. What do you think? Tell me in the comments. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing and share it with your friends. And please support me on Patreon. And until next time, keep dreaming, everybody.